Welcome to another episode of Samso Insights. Today we have a very special episode to share with you guys. I'm in Adelaide at the Core Library, and special thanks to go to Department of Energy and Mining for allowing us to have this privilege here. I have Anna Petz, who's the project coordinator for Department of Energy and Mining. I think you have your title as Characterising South Australia's cover at Geological Survey of South Australia.
That's right.
And I'm taking this off your LinkedIn profile, bringing together research in regolith and the critical zone to understand the regolith cover and better comprehend the complex interaction between rocks, minerals, vegetation, fauna and climatic conditions.
Sounds very
And we can't go without your quote. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. Albert Einstein. And I have to say I fully agree. Well, Anna, welcome to Samso.
Thank you so much for having me.
And when you agreed to do this, I was over the moon. And then he told me the venue. That was even better. As you guys can see, this is the Core Library. Look, Anna, I'll just get you to introduce yourself, and we'll get right into it.
Sounds great. So my name is Anna Petz. I'm the program coordinator for Characterising South Australia's cover. So I've been at the Geological Survey now for 5 years, just over 5 years. And really I'm part of the geoscience group, and our role is to sort of provide data acquisition, to take a lot of the data that companies give us, and we work on that legacy data to improve the prospectivity for the state. So understanding better what our mineral potential might be, but also provide advice to explorers, mining companies and other stakeholders.
I guess, the title of this conversation is really about the prospectivity of the Gawler Craton. Before we head off, I'll, put a disclaimer. We'll be talking about my listing, Titan Resources, and our projects. Obviously, it's in South Australia. But really, since my sort of introduction to South Australian geology, Gawler Craton, really give me a different view of what could be here and can be here. So, and I mean, going forward, this place here has got half a million meters of core.
Yep.
Fantastic. Look, and Gawler Craton, we had this discussion before, probably one of the only other place in Australia that's left that's sort of kind of not really full of explorers. And it's the cost of exploration, the return on investment on mineral exploration, seems to be dampening the rush for discoveries. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think perhaps they always say that so much of the discoveries have already been made that are pretty much sticking out of the ground or close to surface, and so that next frontier and that big initiative a few years ago with Uncover was to say, how can we find the next generation of deposits which are undercover? So it could be 20 metres of cover, it could be hundreds of metres of cover, and it's quite interesting. In South Australia, we've got functioning mines that were 800 metres below cover, to get to the deposit. So we're not afraid of getting undercover in South Australia, with 75% of the state covered by transported sediments. Then we really need to be smart about how we do it. So I think hopefully, the fact that we are pretty comfortable with exploring through cover, or, working and understanding the cover in South Australia means that, for companies that's an attraction. With the Gawler Craton, it's a really interesting place because a lot of people are scared to go out there. They've heard about the paleo valleys and the big, Mulguthing Trough. It's a massive Permian paleo channel. It's, about 800 metres deep or even deeper. So that really makes people think, well, what's the risk out there when it could be, hundreds of metres of cover. But at the same time, most of the Gawler Craton only has, say 10 to 30 metres of cover. It looks like there's more because we've got sand dunes and things like that, but it's actually quite an interesting place to explore, and a lot of techniques are still really useful out there. My role in the Geological Survey and working with other people in my role, part of our job is to get out there and do data acquisition to de-risk that exploration for companies, and to also, provide information about the Earth's surface and the Earth's crust in South Australia and how it fits into the nation, the national geology. And but it's also part of our role is to create these data packages or value add. So when people like yourselves, other explorers come out there, they've got some basic information already, and there's a lot more confidence to run an expensive survey or do some data acquisition themselves. And also, we're here. We've got the core library, so people can do some drilling or come out here and look at, say, older drill holes in the area first, and then they can see, maybe the cover isn't so thick, or perhaps what we're looking for isn't too far away from the surface. So that's really great. I think that's a really exciting thing.
It's interesting to note that when we talk about cover and people talk about cover in South Australia, really, as you said, majority of the Gawler is actually reasonable cover, 30 metres to 60 metres. And those big, massive ones tend to be on the outside of
That's right.
Well, call it central Gawler or Gawler proper, whatever you want to call it. And then you get the, where you find your Olympic dams and Carrapateena, there are hundreds and hundreds of metres of cover.
Yeah.
Can you give us some context? I'm looking at this map that you got on the wall there, and you got this big Gawler Craton, and there's what appears like a mobile belt around it.
That's right, yeah.
And I think that's where you're referring to, where most of the cover sits.
Yes, yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I guess, especially for people that aren't familiar with South Australia, the Gawler is, big, Archean to Mesoproterozoic sort of, area of rock, so belt of rocks. We have, especially in the central part, we have the Archean, metasedimentary, and also these intrusive suites. So the Sleafordian orogeny has produced a whole suite of types of igneous bodies and extrusive as well, all the way through to the Mesoproterozoic, which is where we see so the 1590 events and the Hillspur event, where we've got these big intrusive bodies that have pushed through and brought a lot of fluids with them, and created some of these really big granite bodies within the crust, and done a lot of created a lot of alteration, deformation, and potential for these mineralizing systems. What we do find, and this is not, I'm a regular geologist, so I'm not the expert, but around the...
What the heck? Just say you're
what
the
the
expert.
heck? Well, I'm the expert. Around the outside, we find there's a lot of younger intrusions and things like that, which is what we're talking about. And that's where there's actually quite a lot of potential, where you're on the edge of that craton. You have these younger intrusive bodies and extrusive bodies, and say 30 million years later, and that's where they're finding, there could be a bit of a correlation with some of that lead and zinc and silver that we see to the south with Paris, and then sort of the Gawler Craton, Central Gawler Gold Province is quite related. It sort of circles around the eastern part of the belt. There's also sort of these little sections around to the west as well. And then we see that as we move away from that central part of the Gawler, you start getting those nickel systems on the western Gawler, and when you get into the Fowler domain, there's a whole lot of potential, because it's like you say, it's relatively unexplored. There are, we know there's heavy mineral sand potential, in the cover, which is really interesting, but there's not a lot of companies. There's a lot of companies that are starting to pick up ground now and get confidence in looking for those types of things like nickel and other, elements in PGEs, in what was an area that was not traditionally thought of as being prospective for that. And I guess that's where, as people do data acquisition, as people do drilling, you start getting by circumstance or joint ventures, because you need to do your work on your ground. You start bringing in new ideas and new mineral systems, and that's where I think people start making discoveries and finding these new prospects, which is really exciting. So there's always been a sniff, in the Gawler about this, some of the different commodities, but just sort of to have that confidence to go undercover and explore through the sand dunes, or not worry too much about the paleo channels, but get out there and have a look is really interesting. I think what's really interesting as well is that you've got things happening in 800 million years ago, where you've got the Gerdner dolerite, dike swarms, coming through, and that interaction. Then you've had a lot of orogenies, the Kararan and Illyrian orogeny at the same time, or around the same time as that big Hiltaba, and other, sweet intrusions through the area. So there's been a lot of reworking and overprinting as well in the Gawler. So I think because you've got that complexity, it takes a lot of time and research to pull that apart. So that makes it really interesting.
When I think of South Australia, and that could just be me or maybe the general thinking, is that, in the mid-90s you hear of the discovery of Challenger, and there was this rush. Everyone was in South Australia. I still remember sitting in the office thinking, where? And then, you had Dominion was the main player there. Then Helix had a big discovery, or they had a big run on the share price.
Yeah.
And then that's it.
Yeah.
Up to today, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at the map, you go Challenger, then you go Tarcoola, Tunkilia. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's where the conversation ends.
Yeah.
You got a bit of spotty stuff around.
Yeah.
So you think about the decades has gone past, and then now, obviously doing some research on this conversation, there's so many mineralization type styles that's mentioned in the Gawler.
Yeah.
The suite of metals that people are finding. But then you still have, and then you look back, what do we hear and what do we know of? Very little. How many companies? I can probably lay on Cobra. Didn't even know Cobra exists till I met Cobra themselves. Then you got Indiana, you got Petrotherm a bit. That was only a little bit here and there. Then you got the Olympic Dam guys, the Olympic Dam, Carapatina. Then that's it.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is the case? That we're not hearing more stories?
It's a good question. I think what's been interesting with the Gawler is that everyone's got such a high opinion of the prospectivity that it's very tightly held ground. And sometimes the popularity is the issue. When the ground's locked up, it takes a lot of effort to kind of keep programs moving along, and I guess that's part of the role of government in that type of thing as well. And within the survey, I think in recent years we've seen a bit more turnover of the ground now, and so we're seeing new licenses being taken up or joint ventures. I think sometimes, the commodity prices has a bit of a play, and just the drive to try and prove something out. I think when we saw, it was quite exciting when we saw Tarcoola back in operation, and that was really great to see, some action there. I mean, that's such an interesting pit. I mean, the good thing for the geological survey is that we got some great access to that to be able to study, the mineralisation there and get a real handle of, the interaction of those metasediments and the dike swarms, in particular, Lady Jane, and things like that, to try and understand how the mineralisation got there. So I think perhaps, there could be that little bit of complacency that you just say the word Gawler and people go, oh, I go find finding something. So perhaps that's part of it, is that we need to start getting those success stories out there, and we need to be confident that the work we're doing is the right work to be doing. I think in past years, there's been big joint ventures and they were really exciting at the time. What led up to Challenger was the calcrete sampling in the Gawler joint venture. But then I know in previous episodes you've had people that have touched on it's not one size fits all for when it comes to your exploration models and your exploration techniques. And so I think it's gone quiet because people just needed to build up what their next exploration tool might be. We see with companies like Marmota, they're really pushing the biogeochemistry, which is fantastic because we know that what they're chasing in the terms of their gold systems are in the metasediments, and they don't really have that geophysical signature. So it's not much use trying to run lots of geophysics. So within the geological survey, we're looking at doing, data acquisition work like ground gravity that's just completed. We've been working with Geoscience Australia to have AEM, so airborne electromagnetic surveys done over the area. So we've got a 5 kilometre infill, which is really exciting. There's obviously been AEM done in the area before, but this is really great quality. And it's actually at a west-southeast orientation, which is kind of going across a trend. Usually we would sort of run things east-west, and that also will tie in with magnetotelluric surveys that have just been done, and they're being modelled currently on a supercomputer. So that's really interesting. I think having that additional information is really going to give explorers that big picture regional analysis, and I think that'll be able to be used to sort of push some of these other commodities. Because I think, we're used to looking for certain signatures, and there's certain geophysical signatures and geochemical signatures, for gold and things like that. When those things don't work because of the nature of the deposit style, so say, the gold around Challenger is not going to be easily found unless you're on the ground and you kick it over basically and you find it, then we have to get a bit smarter. And we're really looking, within the survey, we're really looking to try and find out why, how we can find another Challenger in that way, through the geochemistry of the rocks, getting back to the legacy data, but also understanding better some of the isotopic signatures and things like that, to sort of create a search space using these new technologies. We have a embedded researcher with the MINEX CRC, which is a big cooperative research centre for looking for getting deep undercover. They're running, coiled tubing rig trials and things like that, which has been amazing. We've been involved in that in the past. But now we have a embedded researcher who's just recently graduated from the University of Adelaide, who's really getting into understanding, the metamorphic and story, and understanding what's going on with the rocks below cover, and then seeing what we can use to, in some of this legacy data work here, what people have completed, studied in the past, and build up that picture for the area, which will be really exciting.
When you talk about all these initiatives, is it something recent that the government, I assume, is paying for this, pushing through this? Is South Australia sort of slower or behind other states providing government data? Because a lot of small explorers, like the company I'm involved with, we depend on this to give that big picture, the concept, the high level vectoring, right? And I must say, we're beneficial people of that initiative. I mean, looking at stuff and coming up our own concept, yet to be proven. But is that the case? This initiative is it a recent sort of, hey, we need to do this?
I think the Geological Survey and the state government has always been involved in a lot of these moves to, create a favourable environment for especially small junior explorers to come in, medium explorers to come in and get assistance. So I think we were running, what's been quite famous, a lot of the drill holes probably in the area that we've been looking at, part of your own company's research would be, say, PACE funded holes, and that was a previous government's initiative to actually fund drill holes, in some of these areas. So that was co-funded drilling. More recently, we've had the Accelerated Discovery Initiative, which was sort of funding research initiatives by companies, and that's been really successful in getting companies to, maybe link with researchers, but also to sort of push to do some things out of the ordinary. So not just your drill program, but to think outside the box when it came to the exploration program, and just gave them that extra incentive to, get the research funding, or get the funding to do some extra research. So that was really exciting. So that's probably we obviously, with things like MINEX CRC, we're hoping to, be able to get out and do some more drill programs. We've just finished one in the Delamerian with the National Drilling Initiative, where we actually drilled conventional and coiled tubing drill holes in Alawuna and the Quandong Vale region. I mean, the Murray Basin is super underexplored, obviously, for reasons with the cover. It's got 3 different basins in some parts before you get to the actual basement. Also, the water, because it's a prescribed water area, and the influence of the Murray River. So that was really exciting to be able to get out there and prove up some ground, get some information about the basement rocks as well, which is quite sparse. So we're hoping to do similar initiatives. It might be around the Gawler, it might be somewhere else in the state, but to get out there and actually answer some science questions, which all the companies are asking themselves, but that's not their bread and butter. Their bread and butter is to find the minerals, but we can assist in answering, what's the big picture here? How does this fit in? And can we answer some questions about, can we link together all this different work that companies are doing and say, what is the big picture, and how does it all fit together in understanding the geology of the state? So.
Okay, now that everyone's sitting there and they know what you guys have done and all this, and they're sitting there, well, okay, Anna, where should we go?
Yeah.
So I mean, when that question is, what is a place where, like for us, we found a place that, the old story, no one's been there, and we go there and we think it is.
Yeah.
So that kind of scenario, if you put in your head all the data that you think of, where could be the hot spot. I'll give you guys her home address, so she has.
Right.
But anyway, where potentially could be the hotspots.
It's a great question. I think just recently we had a Justin Gums put out a really great report on the Central Gawler Gold Province and bringing together all these disparate mineral systems or ideas about how gold's formed in the Gawler and really put it into a classification, which is fantastic. I'd recommend everyone to refer to it, and he's actually got a really great figure which shows how all these different orogenies have and these intrusions of different different types of sweets have impacted the Gawler, especially the Central Gawler. But he talks about the whole of the Gawler, and what I find really interesting with that report is that the Central Gawler especially is really dominated by what we call the Gawler Range volcanics. So that's, in a way, that's our cover when it comes, it's very old. It's, 1,500 million years old. But that's the cover that we see in that area. So that's what stops a lot of people from drilling there, because sometimes that is quite thick. And you're thinking, you've got these different types of volcanics. It really just creates a like a massive area that you're not going to find any geochemical signals come through from the basement. So that's probably a big challenge for us, and probably something that we really need to understand better and, find out how we can de-risk that for explorers. I think what I find really interesting is there's sort of the areas in between, so I think we talked yesterday quickly about we know where Olympic Dam is, and we know that that's an IOCG zone around the eastern part of the Gawler, and how that has that play all the way, the Gawler's quite a big area. You go from the coast, all the way through to Cooperpedy, really. And then you've got a lot of these systems moving out around, to the west and south, where we have a lot of these known deposits as well. So I think that's what's probably really interesting, is understanding how you get these different mineral systems zoning out from there, where you see a lot of the gold towards the centre. Then you start seeing these like copper and uranium systems, especially on the eastern side. But then, on the western side, like what's the potential through there? We talk about nickel. Other PGEs, we've not talked about rare earths yet, but when you've got these big mineralizing events and these really interesting, rock chemistries in the centre part of the Gawler, then, how's that affecting all the sediments that are coming off? We've already seen, the Euclid Basin and the heavy mineral sands is really influenced from the Albany-Fraser origin and the Musgraves. But perhaps we're going to see some more local influence in those paleochannels of some of that material that's shedding off that Central Gawler area. You think about these Permian paleochannels, what that landscape would have looked like, which is what I find really poetic and kind of inspiring, is that, you've got these probably, maybe glacier covered or, quite snowy Alps in the Gawler that have, obviously now they're all worn down, but they would have been, ice carving out these channels, and you would have these sediment flow moving through. Then what's been removed and what's prospective in those paleochannels, perhaps, which I think would be really interesting. And we know that when you've got this material shedding, and then you've got these prolonged periods of weathering and like just been exposure, oxidation, we've had swamps and stuff build up around the area on the flanks of the Gawler as well. When we've got these big basins, you've got the Officer Basin and Arkarunga and a whole pile up to the north especially, and then the Euclid Basin to the west. So I find that's really interesting. I don't think we thought a lot about the cover in terms of, how we can explore for the systems that are just sitting below it. But I think there's a lot of potential perhaps in the cover when we talk about some of the paleochannels and some of the material that's moved off as well, which I think would be really interesting. But also when we think about the environment before it was all just, semi-arid, arid desert, when Australia was temperate, it doesn't take that long to get there. And we had these big periods of, it was quite tropical probably around here, also quite icy and temperate as well. But perhaps there's been these, could be lateritic, build up and these residual landscapes, which could be really interesting and maybe we haven't found that yet because we're not looking for it yet either. So I think that's potential for the Gawler is really interesting.
During the time when, I mean, I'm told this, whether it's factual or mythical kind of conversation, is prior to Paris being discovered, there was not an understanding, or there was an understanding that in that section there where you get the Olympic domain, and then you get the gold Gawler, if you want to use that. That was no man's land, and Paris popped up, and then Paris is, a porphyry or that style.
Yeah.
How significant is that to the overall complex? If somebody else did find that somewhere, or some thought came through, because I asked that question obviously because we were understanding our projects in an area where quite similar to what I've just described. We've done some zircon testing. It potentially talks about tapping the same source as the OME, Olympic metal event.
Yep.
But whether you find a deposit there is another question, right?
Yep.
So how impactful would be things like that to you guys in your learning process and understanding and hence explaining?
Yeah, that's I think it's one of those things, isn't it? You just until you know what you're looking for, then everything's going to be new and exciting. So I think that's part of our role is to keep our perceptions open, not to be too caught up in what there has to be the story for that area. I think, like you say, it's such a big area that so much can just be sitting there right in front of you, but until you like a creek erodes it, or you find some float, it's just not something you're looking for. It takes the right geologist sometimes, or could be our back rider, or like with Broken Hill, just to pick something up and say this looks unusual, and what is it? So I think
that kind of thing is spread all through. I mean, you hear the story of how iron ore was discovered in the Pilbara.
Yeah.
Lang Hancock flying around, oh geez, look at that.
Yeah.
And it goes on,
Yeah, that's right.
Some guy kicking a nugget, someone looking at some gossan somewhere. So it's and then now we're realizing rare earths are not very rare.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we realize, there's two types: there's clay and there's ionic. So it's an evolving beast in some ways.
That's right. Yeah.
And I guess from the department, you're just trying to produce the data set. The interpretation is left to the geo with X number of glasses of red wine to come up with a model, right?
Yeah, I think we're lucky that we have some amazing geologists, within the survey that have, done a lot of research themselves. So I know there's like some really great models that Claire Wade's put together as part of her PhD research, which is looking at that development mineral systems, from those big Hilterber intrusions and those igneous bodies through to that sort of porphyry systems on the side of it. So you kind of, I guess it's not just like one thing moves through and that's it. You've got, little fingers of things and smoke coming off, these bigger events. So I think that's when we talk about porphyries and stuff like that, they're just like little off bits, aren't they? Like off gassing of these big bodies. So that's quite interesting.
I mean, now they're still debating how Olympic Dam was.
Oh, that's right.
Formed,
it's never,
right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's never-ending story.
That's right. Yeah.
I always tell people it doesn't matter how we got there. If you got enough to make money, that's all you need to worry about.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You can worry about how we got there later.
Yep.
And I guess in sense of when we look at, for me obviously I have selfish interests here, but when you look at Gawler and what prospectivity of the Gawler, it is I think the undeniable fact is that there's just so much to see and find still.
Yeah.
And someone just needs to get out there and do it.
Yeah. I think that's some of the collaborations that the survey have been working with, say CSIRO, and they've been able to bring in like a lot more of this new technologies into how we understand our big geophysical data sets. So say looking at lineament mapping, not that it does not always that a deposit lines up with a lineament, but when we know that we see these sort of structures or structural influence, on the Earth's surface, so whether it's just like a ranges lining up in a straight line, it's fault related, that type of thing. These are sort of providing these pathways, from deeper parts of the crust and the mantle through to the surface, and you got the enhanced ability for fluids that might have some interesting metals or that migration through them. So Carmen Craft worked with, and Mark Pauly worked with the team from CSIRO, where they've produced like some really great sort of models, looking at sort of prospective target areas across the Gawler, and it doesn't line up at all with areas that have been looked at already. This is where you got the mixture of or the coming together, or that insight into where lineaments are meeting up. But then you got that prospective area that you might be able to go in and target, where you've probably got some influence from the deep part of the crust, and you're probably going to see that coming through to the surface, and probably find a sniff at the surface. So that provides myself, but explorers, an area, something to follow up on and get out there and say, well, what has been done in this area, and what sort of signals might we be able to find. So that's been really great. We've got ongoing work to utilise all these new data sets, data acquisition through the Gawler Phase 2, which has been really taking insights from the Gawler Challenge, which we ran with Unearth a few years ago. And from that, we've worked out that we need to get a lot more information for the Western Gawler. We want to be able to provide data for machine learning purposes, and for these next steps in trying to understand and get more out of our data. So we've been able to go out there and run this ground gravity and airborne MT work. And that's been really great, because we've also got a team of people working on a new seamless geology for the state, and that's our test area. So they're taking these geophysical data sets and using them to provide this new seamless geology. So there'll be like a 3D geology that, instead of having these map sheets that we've got at the moment for each place, that traditional style of mapping, we're instead going to be able to go into an area. You're going to have the same explanatory notes for that area as you would, in the Gawler, that, if you were to be 200 kilometres south of, where you'd be able to, if you've got the same rocks, so they'll be taking from the same database and data information. So that's going to be really powerful, because we won't see these little isolated pockets of descriptions. It'll be, what's the big picture for the state. So that should be really great.
I mean, technology is great for this, to be able to pull that through.
Yeah,
the days of looking at sections, now you just look at 3D models.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Sometimes it's good to get back to basics too, though. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, one of the reasons we connected was you did an Ultrafines program.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? In terms of why, how, and the results?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, it's part of the work I mentioned earlier with Carmen and Mark, was with the linear mapping across the Central Gawler. They produced a regolith landform map as well, and these derivative products. And we thought to get out there and do something complementary, so sort of a partner project, which was to get a regional baseline or characterisation of the soils in the area, not just soils, but ultrafine. So what's the prospectivity of the area, but also what's the regional background? And part of that project with CSIRO, so we worked with Ryan Noble and Dave Cole, was to actually pull together like a smart sampling program. So instead of sampling across a grid, which we know in the Gawler access is terrible, we sometimes you're really reliant on old station tracks, and even when you do rely on them, they're often not existing anymore. So it can be quite hard to get in and out in a vehicle, and quite limited, to use other types of things sometimes in programs. So we organised sort of using the main roads, and also just getting a spread across the main sort of regolith and landform soil types. So we used a few different data sets to input, and then we provided sort of about 5 classifications across the area. So, these are the main areas we need to sample, and then also let's just get it in a good grid. We were constrained somewhat by some of the regional reserves in the area, and then even then, when we went out there to do sampling, some things were just inaccessible. But we did a pretty good job. So we made sure we got across the Harris Greenstone belt, and then we made sure we were, getting out in the Mulgathing area up to the northwest. Made sure we were sort of around Tunkelia and Tarcoola, and we also made sure we were, on the way up to the sort of Mount Woods and Christie domain. So we sort of made sure we got into every area that we could. And what we found when we did that sampling was that, the ultrafine results were really great to see. Not only did it, I guess, in the Central Gawler especially, there's gold everywhere. You're going to get these sort of slightly elevated levels, so we wouldn't say that anything's anomalous. And I think having that regional characterization underneath it. So to say, in this area, your gold values are, this is the average in this area. We can actually see what the baseline is. So what might seem anomalous, signal for one area, it's probably just background because there's a lot of gold in the system already. So we could kind of rank that. Whereas, for other metals like nickel and things like that, we could see that, that nickel we can see that that's actually like a bit of an outlier for the area. So that's probably going to be interesting. So that was really great to kind of have that underlying understanding of like what's that regional context. And that was quite powerful, I think, because it's one thing to kind of look at it in ArcGIS or IOGAS and go, well, what are we doing here with these things? But it's another thing to be able to give it that additional ranking and classifying. So I think that would be quite helpful for explorers. We in the process of still getting that paper out, but we've got the data's available, via SAG data and SARIG for that. And I also ran a program for biogeochemistry. So at the same time, we threw out there sampling the soils. We took some plant samples. So now we've got a really great lot of data, which is going to provide a regional background for the plants, like at least for the pearl blue bush, black blue bush across the area, and a few other plants. There's been quite a bit, obviously, with some companies using biogeochemistry to understand their prospects, and there's been other work that's been done by federal and government, and as well as GSA, sort of to understand that regional context. So I think we're really building up a nice picture of where biogeochemistry is going to work. So where it's shallower cover, it's going to work great. We know that it's picking up some really great signals that make sense with the underlying geology, and we can partner that with the ultrafine, and sort of people can use those two things to say, well, we might see it in the plants, we see it in the soils, and why not? Which I think is a great story, because often plants will pick stuff up without needing to pick it up, and that makes it really interesting. Whereas sometimes the soils can be a bit diluted or mask it. That's why we use the ultrafine in the first place.
So all that data is available for people?
Yep, it's all available. Yeah, and
Okay.
it's getting reported on eventually.
So
yeah.
how deep, or from the numbers, with the plants especially, what's the depth of cover that expand? Are we less than 10, less than 20, or?
I think plants will have taproots depending on the type of plant. So when you've got some of the blue bush or trees, a lot of these plants that seem to exist even though there's no water, they're tapping deeper water sources. That's what we know. There's been quite a lot of work done to try and understand how deep they're going, and sometimes they've got taproots up to 10 metres. So they're really looking to get that
But not
perch.
60, 10?
Well, it depends where you are. I mean, I think trees and stuff, bigger things, they're probably going to be doing that. Anyone who's been out in the Gawler knows that besides the Western Mile, which sort of have an area that they like to live, you're hard pressed finding anything big. So you often get these clumping of trees, but it's not like a widespread thing. So depending on the area you move around, we find things like the blue bush, which can live for 100 years. They obviously are doing okay with their root system and their water. They're quite a sort of a regional sampling medium, which has been great. So I think spin effects, things like that, they've been seen to get to 30 metres in a pit. So those taproots are pretty good. I think in an area you've probably got a bit more perched water tables and things in the Gawler, which makes it a bit more interesting. Soils, ultrafine, I think, you probably tap out by 20 or 30 metres, but I think, Ryan Noble discussed it in a previous podcast that it just depends on what that landscape evolutions look like. If it's a sand plain that's 30 metres thick and it's quite homogeneous, then you're not going to see much. But maybe in the Gawler it is quite complex, where you've got these different cycles of, deposition, erosion, things like that. I think we're finding now, I've been doing some work with some of the sort of people working in critical zone and sort of these new technologies, new research in isotopes, which have been really interesting and informative. And I think it'd be really great to see more of it done before we do these soil sampling programs and plant sampling, especially using isotopes to try and understand like what's going on here. Can we see isotopic signature of deeper sediments to the surface? So there's been some really great work done, say like uranium isotopes. If you've got an old drill hole that's got drill cuttings sitting out, then you can actually take some samples through that, get your uranium isotopes, so you can look at that uranium thorium curve to see how stable your regolith's been. But also you can take a plant sample and look for the same isotopes in that plant, we're finding that some of the plants in the areas that have been looked at have got the same isotope signature as the deeper part of the drill hole. So, you know, say 10, 15, 20 metres down, not similar to the transported sediments at the top of the drill hole. So they've taken samples. So that's telling us that those plants are tapping the deeper part of that pedolith or, you know, saprolite or transported sediment. So that's really cool. So I think it's not something that's on a lot of explorers' radar, perhaps, but, you know, perhaps that's for people like the surveys, you know, geological surveys, when we go out to these programs, we can start doing this orientation and say, look, you're getting so much more value out of your data if you've got an understanding of, you know, how stable that land surface is before you take those surface samples. Because people are still out there taking ultrafine soils, they're still out there taking plant samples, but we take it and we assume a lot of things. And I think there's actually, you know, isotopic work's actually, it's expensive, but you don't need a lot to try and prove out something. And I think you do that at the start, you understand your plants a bit better. That means, you know, it's been advised by people within different research groups that work more at surface with vegetation, that even the genetic diversity of the plants is actually probably quite important. And I've never really thought about that, just, you know, how much it might change across an area, but it could be potentially important. You know, maybe that's why you're getting more arsenic in that plant as opposed to over there. Yeah, so that's just assumptions that we base it on. But I do think that it'd be really quite interesting to see, now that I've done this project work in the Central Gawler and the biogeochemistry, and I know so much now about this isotope work that in the regolith, it's like it's going to be a no-brainer that's probably the next thing that we need to make sure we do, as well as some of the, you know, QA/QC we do for the plant sampling. Yeah, it's really interesting.
I think this kind of stuff interests me more now, only because, you know, for what we did in our area, and having to show that we're potentially tapping the Olympic domain sort of event. Yeah. It kind of say, well, you know, that puts a different view to how potentially prospective the area is, right? Yeah. And I put this question to you, and, you know, if that area there, I mean, you sort of know where the area is tapping the same source, and you could actually have the same event, the same tectonic block against something else, right? Yeah. So from that analogy, you know, rightly or wrongly, we're thinking, hey, yeah, that's a margin. Yeah. We could be where everybody wants to be.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's only because we did that work. Yeah. You know, if other than that, you wouldn't have come to that.
Yeah, that's thought, right. Yeah, yeah.
And that's why I think that's what you're saying. By doing these little things, it helps you manifest a theory that could be plausible.
Yeah, that's right.
Rather than, you know. Yeah. Oh, that's no good, and we'll move on, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's where, you know, that's the value, is to dig a little bit deeper and say, well, you know, will there be a difference because of this, and then finding out. So, you know, like you say, like zircon, the zircon work's pretty standard now, you know, for a lot of exploration work to try and understand the age of the rocks, and, you know, so where the things have come from and how it fits into that regional picture. So perhaps when it comes to these, you know, surface exploration techniques, even if it's a soil sample or auger sample, then maybe it's going to be worth getting those isotopes done, because it'll give you an understanding of, you know, is this a sample that's actually worthwhile? Is it actually telling us something about the basement or what's below, or is it just transported? And I think, because we always say, oh, we don't know, so, well, we probably can know through this. And I think that's going to be really exciting. There's also, you know, some of the isotope work that's been done is, you know, you get the heavy and light isotopes, you know, sort of heavy towards the deposit and light as you move away or up through the profile. So I think that's going to be really interesting when you get a lot of these cover-hosted set of, you know, commodities or deposits, potential resources. That would be really interesting as well, just understanding that type of thing. And then that also gives you a bit of something to look for, a footprint, you know, if you understand. So we actually, I have a PhD student with Minex, Zara Woolston, who's looking at the metal isotopes in the regolith, and that's part of it, is saying, you know, as we move away from a known deposit, how do those copper isotopes or sulfur isotopes change? Can we see that? And is that going to be something that we could take, you know, we take surface samples or a plant sample, can we see those isotopes change? And if they get really high near something, does that mean that we're actually, there's a deposit there that's probably worth following up? So that's going to be really interesting as well.
I guess, you know, it's all about, everyone talks about AI, but, you know, at the end of the day, you know, the days of the Terminator is still a long way away, because it's rubbish in, rubbish out, right?
That's right, yeah.
So, look, at this point in time, I guess, you know, normally I get the companies to to sell their soul and
Oh,
say
yep,
what
okay,
buy.
yep,
So
yep.
I've been thinking about how I'm going to get you to sell your soul.
Okay.
So to the guys out there, I mean, obviously all this talk about the prospectivity of Gawler and stuff. Where do you think, I've tried to get you to say it before, but you avoided it.
I know I did. I'm very good at that.
Where could you point to where, maybe it's worth looking? I mean, we agree that the Gawler is prospective as long as you have the balls and the wallet to go and chase after it. But where could you put a finger in what direction?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to tell. I guess I like all of it, but I think I find it really interesting. I think there's some really great heavy mineral stories to be had. I think there's still quite a lot of potential in that sort of Fowler domain and the Carrara shear zone. I think as much as it's way away from everything, like this means that there's a lot more potential. There's a lot less work done, which means there's a lot more opportunity. So let's just say that. Yeah. Which is the area that needs tenements taken up. That's the most.
So to those that are not familiar with the Craton, which direction are we talking
west,
about?
West.
To the west.
Let's get out west. Yeah.
All right. Look, fantastic. Again, I look forward to more conversations with the department. And look, the isotope part I think is really intriguing because it's just something else that no one really has talked much about it. And it's a simple thing. Yes, it costs a bit, but like the zircon thing, I've never done that in my life, and that worked out well. But and I thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
And I hope we can continue because I know there's lots of stuff that we could have talked about.
I know.
But till next time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great to be part of it.